We had a little thaw for a minute there, got some transplanting done, and that was fun. Now we're back into some wintry moments. A little snow on the ground, definitely below freezing. And I thought it would be interesting to take a walk over to our neighbor's yard and take a look at the 14 by 50 foot high tunnel and what's going on in there for this winter. So let's pop over there. I had higher hopes this fall being able to spend a bit more time on dialing in some compost heating systems and getting water systems set up in here. We just ran out of time. We did get some things done, got some plastic on the doors, made this very elegant door handle to keep the door closed, and made a nice ominously creaky door, of course. So some things have been going on in here. We made some time to transplant lots of greens in and did a rough sketch of a compost system for the middle walkway. I'd like to explain some details on that. In the last video where I was talking about this structure, I was explaining how this central walkway, which is a permanent walkway for this space, I'll link to that video here. But what I was doing was figuring out a way to encourage rainwater and melting snow from the south side of this high tunnel to be able to come underneath and back around and be able to go down the entire length of this. And so we just used a simple technique of rocks and boards over a common trench so water can equalize through this whole space. And since then we've been building up a sketch of a compost windrow in here. So it has since gone up about 1.5 feet. You can see it's still below grade from the garden beds, but there's a fair bit of material in here. It's been inoculated with red wigglers, and I suspect that it's actually radiating a little bit of heat in this early mode. Let's take a look if it is. So down on this end, we dumped a bunch of leaf bags as just a very simple bulk carbon source. We added a lot of stalks and stems from outside. Not a huge amount of compost, nothing really rigorous and active, but just some good bulk carbon as a baseline. And by no means is this piping hot by any stretch, but right now outside the ground is somewhat frozen, and in here the walkway is around 50 degrees Fahrenheit or just below 10 centigrade. Nothing impressive about that, but a good note that it seems feasible that we can bulk this out. Basically, if we were to bring this all the way up to grade with these garden beds, there's a lot of volume left to be filled in here, but a bit more with an eye towards nitrogen rich, maybe coffee grinds, maybe add urine, and then a bunch more carbon. We should be able to get some layers and get some vigorous compost heating. But even 50 degrees radiating out gently from that central walkway seems to have some positive influence. You can see some of these lettuces and mustards are doing pretty nicely. And so even though it's a rough sketch, having plastic over the doors and the plastic down over the sides, knowing that there's some conservation of warmth in here, it seemed reasonable to start transplanting greens and plants that were outside into this context. So we took some aged compost from the chicken yard, a couple truckloads, and brought them over. So we've got some really beautiful top dressing of somewhat aged compost here, and then went outside where all sorts of seedling kales and parsleys and lettuces were growing out into that were in the winter landscape, and moved them into here. Got the solar panel set up one more time with the bilge pump in the pond and pulled water up. Was able to get a good deep hydration into here. And it's neat to see how well these transplants are going. So these are just mustards that were outside and now they're in here. And I think as we develop the compost heating in the central walkway and hold them so that they don't get too burnt by the cold of this winter, they should be able to perk up and grow beautifully sometime in February and March. But as of now, we're being able to eat fresh cilantro from here and cook up some mustards once in a while. So I'd consider it a minor win. And I pushed in some of these simple 1/2-inch EMT conduit tubes along this one row. Just as a happy accident, I was pushing this one in, it bent a little, and I realized, ooh, that's actually a benefit because the south is this way. And so having a little bit of a flatness from the south should allow a little bit more light in. So I leaned on all of them and bent them just a bit. And so now we've got this infrastructure here that at some point I can get a sheet of greenhouse poly left over and bring that up and over this and clip that on down the line, and that should give us a low tunnel and a high tunnel, which would be a huge boon for greens production and then early spring starts. I was also realizing that once we get the compost in here, I'm going to hold on it for now because we don't need the heat to boost production right now. We just need everybody to not get too cold, which I think seems to be happening by default. But if I were to bring the compost, the hot compost line right up to the edge of this vegetation all through here, and then had greenhouse poly that went from the back up and over and was long enough to extend into the walkway, then the radiating heat from this walkway would be trapped inside this space. I suspect we can actually get some very, very warm context in there right around February or March when we need to do tons of spring seed starts. We'll share notes on how that evolves. But that's where this space is for now. Probably, as time allows, bring more compost from the chicken yard and try to fill out some more of these areas over here. We'll shave these common walkways a bit more with a shovel, and when there's a thaw, do some flood irrigating, which seems to work pretty nicely. We can dump water on that end and it moves right down this whole line and wicks into the beds. It does the same thing on this north side now, kind of working towards automating to some extent how water can move through this space. And we'll hold the central walkway now with some carbon and then think about a hot composting system when we need it more. But it's sweet to see how well these little starts that were hanging out in the winter scene out in the gardens out there can come into this space and fill things out. Dill and kale, all sorts of nice friends in here, growing pretty nicely. I feel like they've put a little growth on, and some of the plants that we direct sowed a little ways back are looking lovely. So having these sorts of greens in this space coming into the cold times of winter, even just visually feels quite nice, but adds a lot of color and nourishment to our meals in the winter, so we appreciate having them here. For now, that's the update, and I think once we have another thaw out here, we may go out with the whorry and see if we can't sneak a couple more little transplants here and there. There's all sorts of little lettuces that remain frozen for now, but it hasn't gotten so cold. We haven't gotten down into the teens just yet, so a lot of this vegetation will sit still in the cold winter landscape, and if we get that thaw, we can sneak them into the high tunnel, get them buffered and protected, so we get tons of greens in around February or March, and some greens to hold us until then. Well, let me know if you have any questions, and certainly let me know if you've got any suggestions, if what you're seeing in here makes sense, or you think to yourself, you know, that's a reasonable idea, but what if you tried this or tried that? Always open to different experiments to work with, and we'll keep sharing notes as the winter evolves. I feel like there won't be a huge amount of change or development in here until we get to that time of year where we need to start seeds, but I'm really open to some ideas in the meantime. And my gosh, that to me makes an exciting visual picture when outside it's just getting whiter and grayer, to be sure.